Hi, everyone. We are back. Hope you are ready for the rest of our afternoon and hope that you enjoyed your breakout sessions and got a lot out of everything this morning. Um, for you guys who don't know me and are just joining us, I'm Joy Chevalier, and welcome to the afternoon portion of our conference on food resilience, access, and equity. And just real quick, I would like to thank our amazing sponsors who are supporting our event for us today. In particular, love to pull up my notes and thank our lunch sponsors today, which includes Central Health, which is amazing here in Austin, our UT Dell Medical School, and the Central Texas Food Bank, our friends there, and Equidad ATX, Live Well, Vive Bien, who are totally awesome. We have amazing sponsors for our lunch conversation with you guys. Um, Forgot real quick for those of you guys who are having lunch, actual lunch. Um, Many thanks to Chef Jen and Three Small Plates for you guys who are enjoying her lunch today. So, with me very quickly is a wonderful new friend, Amy Bell. Let me just tell you about Amy Bell very quickly. So, I'm going to check another set of notes here just to make sure because Amy Bell's been all over the planet. Uh, Amy has had an amazingly long career, not amazingly, but she has an amazing career, and it's long, in finance, and in particular, the finance of food systems. So that's a very particular role and a very particular ecosystem. Um, and she's a graduate of UT Austin, double graduate at UT Austin, fellow Longhorn. She has been with Deloitte, at JP Morgan, where she helped lead one of their food fund investment portfolios, very large investment portfolio, Tideline Impact Investing Consulting. She was also is also still a part of Food Shed Investors, one of our local um, impact investing groups, and she is currently the principal of business development at Whole Foods here in beautiful Austin, Texas. So thank you, Amy, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I have to shout out Three Small Plates Catering. I really enjoyed my lunch before this session. So thanks for those of you that didn't get your lunch. You better do next time because it was fabulous.
I know we're all scarfing food real quick here today. So I just gave a list of places and dollars, but how about you tell folks in sort of your own words what you feel you have put together and what your focus is professionally, and how would you define and talk about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually went to UT sort of as a very naive undergrad, really interested in this idea of business and capital markets as a force for good. And I'm not 100% certain what planted the seed at that point in my life, but it's been something I've been really interested in, which is what is the role of the private sector in helping to promote societal impact. And started my career in sort of finance and consulting as a way to sort of build a skill set. And then what kept me at JP Morgan Chase for more than a decade up in New York City was actually the opportunity to launch that firm's first impact investing platform. And at the time, that lexicon was still fairly new. I think it's more commonplace, though I know it often requires still some definition. But the idea simply being that we can invest for more than just financial return, and that in fact the pursuit of financial return and income and profits can be a way to generate positive social and environmental impact. And so my task at JP Morgan was to help demonstrate that was possible from an institutional market perspective. I'm getting some feedback that my audio is a little bit unclear.
No, you sound okay.
Okay, I'll keep going, but if that's not coming through, just let me know. So yeah, so the idea behind it was to demonstrate that this could be an institutional activity. I think there are a lot of organizations in philanthropy and government that have used investment as a tool. And what was novel now more than 15 years ago was this idea that also private sector actors could play a role in that and be good stewards of that type of money. So that was really my sort of focus there. And as I thought about where that career path might evolve for me personally, I realized that had always been really passionate about food and nutrition, about sustainable agriculture and farmers, and did some work both internationally and then here domestically. And ultimately, when I decided I was ready to come home to Texas, and settle back here in Austin, I really wanted to use that as a moment to pivot from being more of a generalist, market focused person to someone who is specifically looking to create impacts around a certain issue area. And that became sort of food and agriculture, and has led to a number of community activities, including Food Shed Investors, who you mentioned. I'm on some boards here in Austin related to that work. I'm fangirling over some of the people that are present here today, like here in Washington, others who are doing this across the country. And ultimately, it led me to Cooksnook and to Whole Foods as a full-time capacity to sort of think about ways that we could use that platform to also support that work. So that's sort of in a nutshell,
Yeah.
a little bit about my personal journey and sort of what I'm focused on.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned I wanted to pull out was you talked about being at JP Morgan Chase and demonstrating in an institutional setting that there's value and impact in investing. What is how do you demonstrate that? What is an example of that? How do you have an institution like that see impact? And what does that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it first and foremost, it was demonstrating that that's not a trade-off. I think, we have as a country, and this is not unique to the United States, there's certainly representations of this elsewhere in the world, but we think about making money and giving money away as two very separate activities and don't really see them as being potentially interconnected. And so the demonstration effect that we were trying to employ at JP Morgan, which was in concert with a lot of other big actors in the market, including leading foundations like the Rockefeller and Gates Foundations, big development banks like the World Bank and the IFC and others who are active in this market, as well as leaders in community development, was that in pursuing impact, you weren't necessarily introducing cost to the equation. That by pursuing impact as part of an investment strategy, you were not implying that you needed to take a trade-off in return. There are certainly a range of returns available in impact investing, meaning that there are some solutions that can be designed to generate income and revenue that may not achieve, say, what people would think of as like a benchmark private equity return. But that's okay. Part of what we were trying to endeavor was to show what types of returns could you achieve, what types of financial structures might be appropriate, and what were the models that were best equipped to deliver on some type of financial return that felt commensurate with the risk that was being taken, but also would look to maximize impact. And we sort of seen that across the board, and we can talk a little bit about how that sort of plays out. But what's great about this idea is that it's not limited to the private sector. There are a lot of nonprofits,
Right,
and organizations, and there's some really great examples here in Austin and other markets of who have generated revenue generating schemes, so they're not reliant solely on donor funds to survive and to sort of support their programming. And it's those projects and initiatives that are actually able to attract some form of investment capital, because you're not just asking for a dollar to be donated that can only be returned with impact, but one that could actually be, you could sort of think of it as almost a virtuous circle where you invest a dollar, you get back two, and then you have $2 more that you can invest in that same cause. So it's a really great way to double down on impact using investment as a tool.
right. And so the reason why I asked that is because, and you already went there, is that whether you're a for-profit enterprise or nonprofit, there's a way to talk about your impact that shows not about just giving away, but not about the dollars, but helping them even find a language or a way to talk about the impact that they're having and the return.
Yeah,
That makes it obvious and apparent to an institution,
yeah, exactly.
and how to do that. Um, how do you learn to do that? How do they learn to do that? How do, I know that's the hard question.
Yeah.
How do they learn to do that?
Meaning, how do organizations
Nations
or
learn to do.
businesses learn the language
Yeah.
for this? It's a little bit of trial and error. I think one of the things that's challenging about the impact investing market is that, like the broader capital markets, there are different types of structures available. And so the way that you might position an opportunity to an investor is going to vary depending on what you're offering. So, for example, if you are looking to say, let me use an example here in the community. So we have the Multicultural Refugee Coalition,
Mm-hmm.
which does some really great programming related to supporting refugee populations that have settled in the Central Texas area. And they have a farm. It's called New Leaf. They run a community supported agriculture program.
Mm-hmm.
So say that they're able to generate revenue off of that because the CSA is sold to members in the community, including
Mm-hmm.
me, and a number of others. And so say that they needed to purchase a piece of equipment to support production on that farm, a new tractor or something along those lines. They could go out and raise money to support that. But if they felt that they had sufficient revenues, they could also look to, secure a loan to actually buy that tractor or piece of equipment and then use the revenues that the farm generates to pay it back. So talking about like how you might support the cash flows related to a debt repayment. On the other hand, you could think about things like equity as well. So if you have a business, I'm trying to think of an example of one that I worked on. I lived in Costa Rica between
Mm-hmm.
moving to New York and Austin and worked with a fund there that does work around sustainable agriculture. And that fund invested in a company called Samba Zone, which some of you may recognize. They actually sell products here at Whole Foods in the United States as well as other markets. They're based on supporting sustainable farming around the acai berry in Brazil, and they work
Mm-hmm.
primarily with smallholder farmers. So they have a really amazing supply chain story, and they were able to raise equity to support their business because they will ultimately, at some point in time, they will either be able to sell that company to a larger strategic corporation. They maybe have the opportunity to go public. There's different avenues by which they might actually succeed. But their whole brand promise and what they do is built on the supply chain story. So for them to grow big and scale to the point where they would need that exit, they'll be able to have a really high impact on those farmers. And so they can actually attract equity investors by saying, hey, if you invest in us today, give us 5, 6 years and we'll be able to grow the business, scale impact, but then also provide you a return based on some ability to sell or exit the company down the road. So there are different ways to talk about it, but I generally encourage people there's a lot of great resources now on the impact investing market geared towards funders. The Global Impact Investing Network is one. There's a great program at Duke University called CASE, the Center for Advancing the Social Enterprise, and others that, like, if you start going down those rabbit holes
Rabbit
of
holes.
resources, you'll find great starting points for having that conversation in your community.
um, you mentioned in this ecosystem, and in particular the farmers with the acai berries, that Whole Foods had a role to play in that, right? In that conversation, that supply chain, and making it visible here, right? Even though the finance structure is something larger, more complicated. How
Yeah.
what is the role of people see our folks like Whole Foods or other grocers? They see them strictly as grocers, but there's another role for them to play in this, right? Can you talk about that a little bit? Where do your large suppliers, let's call them that, you know, with this sort of retail visible front that people know, where does their role in that, the large corporates like Whole Foods?
Yeah, I mean, Whole Foods is unique, and every corporate is. I think there are different reasons that corporates may get involved in impact investing in social enterprise. So it could be related to supply chain. We've seen that quite a bit in the consumer product space with companies like Danone and Nestle, who've
Sure.
really, done work to sort of strengthen what they're doing from an environmental and social perspective. And there could be different motivations for Whole Foods. Our sort of involvement in the sphere of social enterprise or trying to support positive societal impact comes back to our mission as a company. So Whole Foods is established more than 40 years ago now with an explicit mission, which has not changed since we started, which is to nourish people and the planet. And there's a few different a few different ways, I should say, that manifests in terms of what we do. So probably first and foremost is our quality standards. So as I think a lot of consumers at Whole Foods know, there is a sense or at least a perception that we're doing some scrutiny around ingredients. We are in fact doing quite a lot. We have a 70-person team that does a fair amount of work around developing standards and providing assurance that the products that show up on shelf do not contain things that would be bad for you or bad for the environment. And in addition to that, which I would sort of see as like a negative screen, there's this an effort to kind of raise the bar, if you will. So we were one of the first grocers to get into organic and really promote policy there. As recently as last year, we launched a really transparent set of standards around eggs.
Mm.
As you go into a grocery store, I've had this experience as a consumer. I'm sure you've looked at cartons and wondered what the heck do all these labels mean. And so now there's a set of very transparent standards and a grading system for eggs, all of which have to be cage free to be sold in our stores. So there's programs like that around what we allow and sort of standard process, honestly making things very transparent to consumers so that as consumers become more educated around the ways in which they want to eat and where their food comes from, that they feel like they've got a sense of what it is that they're using their dollars for. And then we also have one of our core values at Whole Foods is win-win partnerships. So we do a lot of work with suppliers, recognizing there is a cost to doing business with a large grocer, but there's quite a lot of effort that goes into sourcing suppliers and trying to find the right partners to bring the products that we believe our customers want and that we think are really capturing, again, sort of growing consumer awareness and consciousness around what we eat and where it comes from. And one of the couple different ways in which we do that is we have in every region someone who has the most amazing title, a local forager, and it is their sole job to seek out really exciting local brands, some of which may be local brands that go national, some of them which may remain local, but the idea that local and regional food and local and regional artisans are really important to our brand and to differentiating with customers as well as to the food systems at large. We also, within my team, manage something called the Local Producer Loan Program, which, as the name implies, provides loans to some of these smaller producers as they're growing, recognizing, again, that capital equipment and other things are really important as you go from, say, selling in a farmer's market to then selling to 40 stores in a region at Whole Foods. So those are a couple of examples. I would say the other things that I'll just offer is that there is a consciousness that Whole Foods doesn't serve all customers, and so there's a lot of efforts to think about ways that we can be more integrated into our communities. So last year we formalized and launched a program called Nourishing Our Neighborhoods, where there's just over 20 trucks that were either purchased or donated to support food, to mitigate food waste and make sure that food that was in so good condition but for whatever reason could not be sold in our stores anymore could find a home and go to address hunger relief in a number of communities across the country. So we think over the next 10 years that'll lead to 182 million meals provided through that type of food distribution. And then we also have our foundations, which also do some really great work. In particular, here in the U.S., Whole Kids and Whole Cities do work around school gardens and nutrition education for children, as well as thinking about food access within our communities. And so that's been a really neat way for us to sort of extend the reach, and something that, frankly, team members, employees get really excited about as well.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot.
Yeah. We do a lot. It's great. It makes me really proud to be an employee.
Well, sure, absolutely. And does that then extend to also thinking about policy and advocacy at a legislative level? Do you see large enterprises and grocers going that way to try to make those kinds of changes as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's probably what happened in the most substantial way around organic. That's
Mhm.
something we were involved in very early on from the policy level, and were able to play a role in informing policy and where it went. And that sort of continues. We've done a fair amount of work around seafood standards, around meat standards. A lot of the people we have internally that help to drive those standards for Whole Foods are also really plugged into the policy conversations as a result, because we're on the front lines of understanding what do customers really know and understand about these different segments of the market, and what would be the most instructive thing as it relates to policy setting in a way that customers and thereby citizens would get excited about.
Yeah, and it sounds like, in tech we would call that, corporates are helping drive best practices and those sets of
Yeah,
standards, right? Absolutely.
yeah,
But I want to trace it back to those in finance, because people, and I want to pull that out specifically because people just see that as numbers and they say, no, there can be an ethic in how you think about finance and funding, because that often reflects a set of values.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it's those values that then, you know, get reflected in budgeting. It gets reflected in what's funded. It gets reflected in how the dollars are used, right? That actually helps drive what's happening often in the company or in the business, et cetera. Just, exactly what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth saying that this sort of movement to mainstream the ideas of impact investing has led to, apart and aside, but really relevant to some of the forces that are at play within food, is that a number of financial institutions and asset managers are really trying to create more of this product. And they feel pressure that this cannot just be marketing or greenwashing, as we might call it, but there actually needs to be some substance around it. And so, what it leads to is that, historically, if we talk about, if I'm someone who's going to offer investments to people or institutions, I have to show a lot about my track record as it relates to return and how I manage things like risk. And there's a lot of data and numbers, to your point, Joy, that come out of that conversation, and marrying that with these ideas that we're also going to use those investment dollars and these models to generate impact means that we're having to apply the same level of rigor to impact, and actually measuring and managing that in a way that drives towards the type of impact returns we want to see in investments in addition to the financial ones. And I think that level of rigor and discipline will be a really positive thing as it relates to getting to the type of impacts we know we need to make food systems work better for everyone.
Yeah. Um, do you see potentially Austin becoming a home for serious impact investing? Are we moving towards some mass here, or are there others like you that folks here don't know your universe? Are there others like you who think similarly? And when we know our friends at Food Shed, or are there is there is there there's is are we going to see more of that in is Austin, with everything that's happening here, whether it's in food, whether it's in tech dollars or any sort of dollars? Is there a cadre that's building here of those who think seriously about impact investing?
Yeah, on a personal level, I wouldn't be here if there weren't. It was, I felt some reluctance, to be quite honest, to leave New York City, because New York City felt like the center of the universe, for better or worse, as it related to impact investing as an important source of knowledge and funding. But part of what got me excited about moving back to Austin and coming home to Texas is that I knew that there were some emerging leaders. And so, groups like the Austin Community Foundation, St. David's, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, to name some institutions, as well as a number of individuals that I've met since I've been here, have really given me a lot of excitement about the future for Austin. Probably not surprisingly, within Austin, a lot of the early impact investing activity has been around affordable housing, because we know we are all suffering the cost of real estate going up, and understand what that means, and know that it's also leading to displacement of people in our communities, and to, segregating some people in lower income communities from the center of activity, which is not great for the future of the city. And so a lot of the efforts that have started to bring people together have been around housing, but we all know these issues are interconnected.
Yeah.
And so if you have housing, you also need to be thinking about food and childcare and access to education and transit and
Transportation.
exactly all of those things. And so there's starting to be a more unified front. And what's great for Austin is that I think we're one of the, what I'll call sort of that next level of cities beyond sort of the hubs that tend to have a lot of this activity, like New York and Washington,
Yeah.
D.C. and San Francisco. We're sort of in that next level because we have such an active entrepreneur community. There's a lot of innovation, I think a lot of creativity and interest around social issues. And so this idea that we can use not just philanthropy, but also investment as a tool is starting to resonate. So I do think we are in the throes of becoming a leader in the country around this. And I think we'll continue to see more activity. And my personal ambition is for us to see more of that within food systems as well, because we all love food here. I mean, we love food everywhere, but Austin is such a foodie city, in the best way. And so I think thinking about ways we can also direct capital to supporting our local and regional food system would be a really great achievement for us.
No, absolutely. What would you want businesses, for and nonprofits, to know about finding supportive financial partners? How should they think about it? How should they prepare themselves? How do they think differently? Not just go project to project, but how do they prepare them something to move into a different model like this and to find different and new partners, more strategic partners, long-term partners like this?
Yeah, so I think it starts with a little bit of a, stepping up and thinking more strategically. So if you're a business who's thinking, I would like to be more conscious of my impact, what is the impact thesis that you could develop around that? Like, what are the ways in which, for example, you could have an impact? So it makes sense, for example, for Whole Foods to be thinking about impact as it relates to food systems because of who we are. We're a grocer. It would make less sense for us to be doing a lot of work around housing. You can make a case for it, but in terms of direct immediate impact, it's going to be more related to food. So developing an impact thesis around that and trying to identify what are the specific measures that you might be able to attribute to the activities that you undertake and start to formulate it that way. On the flip side, if you're a nonprofit coming into this who's saying, I want to attract investment capital and think about how I could sort of position myself, I think you then have to develop what's the investment thesis. You probably have a very good sense of what your impacts are, but what are you able to offer? Are we talking about, do you need capital and will it come back to investors in a 5-year time period, in a 10-year time period? Would you be able to offer a return? What are the risks attached to being able to achieve that return? There's just some basic information that's useful to know, because the length of time and the level of return and the risks attached to that will all determine the appropriate financial structure and thereby who's the appropriate investor to participate. But starting there, I think, is a really important first step to being able to then participate in the market and explore who's next.
Yeah. There are a few questions, Amy, I'm going to toss out here.
Sure.
Can you believe our time is winding down?
I know, it went very quickly.
I know. So Gabriel wants to know, what sort of organizational structures make a venture attractive to impact investors? And what is the expectation of return when max profit is not the goal?
Yeah, so the question to the organizational structure, it really depends on the investor, right? Because there are different types of investors out there. I would say in general, you're going to find the most available capital if you're able to offer a structure that is familiar to investors, and that you can offer a level of return and risk that they would be familiar with as well. So the more that you can marry into what already exists in the market, I think the easier it is to find the right investors. That being said, there are a lot of organizations out there that have explored both creative structures, I should say, on the financial front, and then also have more flexibility around returns. I think when you start to look at models, and there are quite a lot of these that exist in the world, where the level of return may not be commensurate with the risk, meaning that you may be taking on higher risk, or maybe it's just a model that has a limit to the type of return it can deliver because of the nature of the intervention.
Right.
So it would be inappropriate then to maybe be targeting sort of somewhat higher return seeking investor, but finding and identifying those investors who really care about the issue area and see sort of investment as a tool that would complement other ways in which they're supporting that issue area. So what sometimes are referred to as impact first investors, who may have more tolerance for differing levels of return because they care a lot about the impact area.
Yeah. Oh, someone else asks, can social enterprises survive in the marketplace without investment when the presence of venture-backed competitor raises the cost to acquire customers? That is a great question.
That's a great question. And that one is a little bit sector specific, I would imagine. And I obviously know the CPG or consumer packaged goods space better than most others. And I would say the answer to that question is probably yes. I do think it'll come back to, like, what are your ambitions as an enterprise? So, a venture-backed competitor, I would assume that if they have venture funding, then they have positioned themselves as a company that's going to grow at some, incredibly high rate. They're looking for an exit to a big strategic acquirer. They're looking to go public, and that just implies a very different level of volume and progress than maybe you might be envisioning as a social enterprise. I don't mean to presume that that's the case, but understanding, like, are you looking to achieve the same things? You may not be as competitive if that were the case. So I do think it will depend on sector, but there are ways to get to customers, again, within certain sectors, and CPG is a really great one, where consumers are increasingly aware that there are products out there that are catering to trying to have better social and environmental impacts in addition to being better for you on a health or nutritional level.
Right.
And so customers are starting to identify that. And so I think if you can find a customer base who really resonates with the message, then I think you can compete with those types of companies as well.
That's what I was going to say, Amy. That sounds like audience segmentation and differentiation.
Yeah, yeah, spoken like a true product person.
Absolutely. So I'm going to see real quick if there are any other quick questions. What was the name of the farm in Costa Rica with the acai berries? Do you remember?
Yeah, the company is called Samba Zone,
It's on Bazaar.
SAMBAZON. They make some beautiful acai frozen berries you can throw into a smoothie. They make drinks, and they have a cool story, so worth checking out.
Cool. All right. Before we go, I'm going to leave you with the last word. What would you want folks to know about finding supportive finance partners? What does that mean? What do you want them to really sort of take away from talking with you? The one thing they could take away from talking with you that they need to go out and put into their organization or into their themselves as they go forward as leaders.
I think, I mean, it's the advice I have in general for anyone that's seeking financing is that don't just be looking for capital, be looking for partnership, regardless of the type of capital you're seeking and what your intentions around it are in terms of how you'll use it and things like that. But finding like-minded partners, values-aligned partners is really important because most of these funders are going to be in it for some amount of time, whether it's 3 years to 10 years or something along those lines. And so knowing that you're getting good partnership in the end is a really important thing to be seeking out. So don't get blinded by those dollar signs. Think about who you're partnering with as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy, for
All
joining
right.
us for lunch
Thanks, Joy.
today. Thank you, guys. And
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
thank you, guys. And where can they find you or drop you a note, Amy? Just real quick.
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Amy Bell at Whole Foods. I think pretty easy to find that way. And then I'm happy to see connections there. I try to be good about checking it a couple
Okay,
times
cool
a week.
beans. Thank
All
you,
right.
ma'am. All right, everybody. We're on next with the next group. Thank you guys so much.